I'm not sure exactly when it began, this habit of making peace that wasn't mine to make, but I can tell you it started young. Maybe you've felt it too. That quiet pressure to be the one who holds it all together, not because you're the oldest or the wisest or the strongest, but simply because you can. And if you can, then you must. I didn't know it then, but my role in the family was written before I ever got to speak a word. It started like any normal week, but it didn't end that way. I was the third child in a family of 5. Not the oldest, not the youngest, just conveniently in the middle. And it turns out the middle child often becomes the bridge. I don't remember signing up for it. No one ever does. My earliest memory of fixing things was during one of my parents' arguments. I couldn't have been more than 6. My dad's voice had that low, sharp edge to it, the kind that cuts deeper than yelling, and my mum was standing by the sink, arms crossed, tears balanced at the edges of her lashes. I didn't know what the fight was about. I just remember walking in and hugging her leg. She looked down at me, startled, then softened. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered, but it wasn't. From then on, I became the quiet balm. If someone wasn't talking to someone else, I was the go-between. If there was tension at the dinner table, I cracked a joke. I learned to sense moods like changes in weather. My survival instinct sharpened into something others mistook for emotional maturity. They called me so mature for your age. I thought it was a compliment, but really, it was a warning. In school, I learned to nod along, to laugh when I was supposed to comfort others even when I was crumbling. I'd come home and mop up whatever emotional mess had leaked into the living room. My siblings would fight, and I'd be the one pulling them apart. If one of them stormed out, I'd be the one sent to retrieve them. I became good at reading people, too good. I could predict what someone would say before they said it. I could rewrite entire conversations in my head before they happened, just to prepare for damage control. And the truth is, no one ever asked if I was okay. Because I looked okay. I was smiling. I was helpful. I was always there. There was this one moment I can't forget. I was 15. My older brother had crashed his car, and my parents were in full panic mode. Voices rose, accusations flew, and suddenly my mum turned to me and said, "Why didn't you stop him?" As if I had that kind of power, as if it was my job. I remember the way that question lodged in my chest like a splinter. I didn't even argue. I just nodded and said, I didn't know he was going out. But deep down, I believed her, that somehow I'd failed. I carried that weight for years. Looking back now, I can see how the role of peacemaker was never a gift, it was a cage, a beautiful, gold-plated one, lined with praise and false responsibility. People like Mew don't erupt. We erode, slowly, quietly, invisibly. I started losing parts of myself I didn't know were optional. Preferences, opinions, even the sound of my own voice in a room full of arguments. At 22, I missed my own birthday dinner because my sister had a breakdown over her boyfriend leaving her, and my mum insisted I go calm her down. So I did. Of course I did. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, eating cold takeout and looking at a single slice of untouched cake in the fridge. It was the first time I let myself cry without wiping it away immediately. Maybe it was nothing, or maybe it was the beginning of something. I didn't know it yet, but a crack had formed in the mirror I'd been holding up to everyone else's reflection. I'd been the peacemaker for so long, I didn't realize I was disappearing. There's something about pretending everything is fine that seeps into your bones. You do it for long enough, and one day you wake up unsure whether the peace you keep creating is even realer, just a carefully constructed illusion you've memorized too well. By the time I was in my mid-20s, my family's dysfunction had woven itself so tightly into my identity that I couldn't tell where they ended, and I began. Every gathering had its own choreography. Who sat where, which topics were off-limits, who might blow up if someone said the wrong thing. And I was the quiet conductor, guiding everyone away from landmines, smoothing rough edges with a smile, diffusing tension before it sparked. But I'd started noticing small things like how tired I felt after every visit. Not physically tired, soul tired. I'd spend the next few days drained, emotionally raw, and yet no one ever seemed to notice. That year, my younger cousin got married. A big church wedding with glittering lights, fake smiles, and the kind of forced joy that makes your jaw ache. I was a bridesmaid, of course I was. My mother volunteered me before I could decline. At the reception, my sister threw a tantrum because the seating chart didn't place her next to her on-again, off-again boyfriend. My father sulked because the wine wasn't to his liking, and my mother was furious with me for not managing things better. She pulled me aside, lips tight, eyes flashing. "You're always so helpful, why are you making things harder today?" I blinked, my cheeks burned, and for the first time, I said nothing. I just stared at her, not angry, not apologetic, just blank. She looked back at me, startled, like she'd suddenly realized I wasn't playing my role. I walked away, and I didn't look back. It was small, I know, barely a moment, but that night, I drove home in silence, hands clenched on the wheel, heart pounding. Something had shifted. For the first time, I'd chosen not to fix it. I didn't soothe, I didn't mediate, I didn't make it okay, and no one thanked me, no one followed up. No one asked if I was all right. It hit me then. Maybe they didn't love me. Maybe they loved what I did for them. That thought haunted me for weeks. I tried to brush it off, told myself I was being dramatic. But little memories began surfacing, years of moments when I wasn't seen, just used. Like when my brother forgot my college graduation because he was too tired, but I still showed up for his divorce hearing. Or the time my sister borrowed money, promised to pay it back, and then got angry at me for reminding her. And every time something cracked in the family, I was the glue. It wasn't until one night, curled up on my apartment floor with an untouched dinner beside me and my phone buzzing with yet another group chat meltdown, that I whispered aloud, "What if I stopped?" The silence that followed was deafening and terrifying, because if I stopped being the peacemaker, who would I even be? I wasn't ready to find out yet, but the question stayed. It echoed through every holiday phone call, every half-hearted apology, every dinner where I smiled through clenched teeth. The illusion of closeness started to wear thin. I saw more clearly now the digs hidden in jokes, the way every gesture came with a string attached, the unspoken rule that my needs came last. Then came my father's birthday, a big family dinner, full of forced toasts and bitter laughter. My brother showed up late and drunk. My mother snapped at the waitress. My sister announced she was moving in with someone she met online 2 weeks ago. The whole night was chaos. And when dessert was served, my mom looked at me and said, "Aren't you going to say something to bring everyone together?" I smiled politely. Then I excused myself. I walked out into the cold night, stood under the stars, and breathed. I didn't go back in. That night, in the quiet of my car, I realized something else. Maybe they didn't even notice I was gone. I didn't say anything to anyone after that dinner. Not a text, not a call. I didn't answer the usual follow-up messages asking for explanations or apologies. Not because I wanted to hurt anyone, but because I was tired of bleeding for people who never noticed. And at first, no one noticed. That was the part that stung the most. A week passed. Then 2. I didn't hear a thing. No check-ins. No, "Are you okay?" Not even a passive-aggressive guilt trip. The silence was louder than any argument. And so, I did something that felt quietly radical. I stayed silent too. It felt strange, like walking barefoot in a house you've always tiptoed through. Every step felt wrong at first, then liberating. I didn't jump into the group thread when my sister started complaining about her boyfriend again. I didn't volunteer to help plan the next family gathering. I didn't offer advice when my brother posted a cryptic message about feeling betrayed. I let it all pass me by, and it felt like the first real breath I'd taken in years. But freedom, I've learned, is not always clean. Sometimes it comes with guilt braided into every thread. There was one night, maybe 3 weeks in, when I sat on my couch staring at my phone. The screen was black, but I kept unlocking it, hoping to see a message. Something. Anything. I even typed a message to my mom, just a simple, "Hey, how are you?" But I never hit send. Instead, I deleted it and cried. I felt unmoored, like I'd let go of something I'd clung to my whole life, and now I was drifting in open water. No map, no anchor, but I wasn't drowning, not yet. Then, the message came. My brother texted, out of nowhere, "Guess you're too good for us now. Just don't come running back when things fall apart." No context, no greeting, just a strike to the gut. I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't reply. What could I say that wouldn't be twisted, resented, used as ammo in the next family war? Instead, I closed the app. And that was when I realized something bitter and sharp. Even when I didn't play the role, I was still blamed, still the scapegoat, still the target. I had changed, but their narrative about me hadn't. A few days later, my mum called. I let it ring. She called again. Then, she left a voicemail. I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but this family needs you. You've always been the glue. If you stop caring, everything falls apart. Don't be selfish. Selfish. That word sat with me like a thorn. I played the message twice, then a third time. I kept trying to hear something underneath it. Maybe love, maybe fear, maybe regret. But all I heard was pressure, and a story I'd been forced into since childhood. I wanted to scream. I'm not the glue, I'm a person. I'm tired. I want to be more than a band-aid for everyone else's wounds. But I didn't. Instead, I turned off my phone. For the weekend, for the first time in years. I went to the farmer's market alone, took a walk by the river, Saturday in a park with a book I barely read. And for the first time, I noticed things. The crunch of leaves under my shoes, the way the wind made my hair dance across my cheeks, the scent of roasted coffee from a cart nearby, things I'd forgotten how to enjoy. And somewhere in that quiet, a thought surfaced. Maybe I'm not here to hold anyone else's story together. Maybe I have one of my own. It was terrifying. And it was true. It didn't take long for the next crisis to erupt. My cousin's baby shower, of all things, became the latest battlefield. A dispute over the guest list, a fight between my aunt and sister about who was more supportive. And somehow I was dragged into it despite saying nothing at all. My sister sent me a voice message laced with irritation. I don't know why you're being so distant lately. Everyone's talking about how cold you've become. You used to be the one who brought us all together. Honestly, you've changed and not in a good way. There it was again, the accusation in disguise. I sat there listening to it in the grocery store parking lot, gripping the steering wheel with one hand and feeling my throat tighten. I hadn't said a single thing about the shower, hadn't weighed in, hadn't sided with anyone, and yet I was somehow responsible for the fallout. Blame always had a way of finding me. Even when I disappeared, they still built a version of me in their stories: a villain, a deserter, a disappointment. I didn't respond to her message. Instead, I closed my eyes and let myself feel it. The weight, the injustice, the deep, bone-level exhaustion that came from a lifetime of emotional labor no one recognized. Then I went home and did something I'd never done before. I turned off my phone. I lit a candle. And I wrote. I started to write the truth note for them, not to explain myself, but for me. I titled the first page, What I've Carried. I listed every time I had to stay silent so someone else wouldn't get angry. Every apology I made just to keep the peace. Every event I attended even when I was sick, heartbroken, or burned out. Every gift, every favor, every moment I erased myself to make someone else feel whole. The list went on for pages. By the end, my hands were shaking, but I felt lighter, and for the first time, I allowed myself to ask a question that had always been buried under guilt. What if I was never supposed to carry all of that? What if real love wasn't supposed to feel like a job? I didn't realize it then, but that question would become my compass. Still, the next time my mum called, I picked up. Old habits die hard. She launched into the usual routine: who said what, who was upset, who needed me to mediate. I waited, let her talk. Then I asked calmly, Mom, why is it always me that has to fix things? She went silent for a beat, then scoffed. Because you're the only one strong enough. I was quiet too. But inside, something snapped. I'm tired of being strong, Mom, I said. I'm tired of being the glue. Maybe if everyone stopped depending on me to keep it together, we'd all learn to do it ourselves. There was a long pause. Then she said something that still echoes in my chest. You've changed, and I don't like who you're becoming. I didn't reply. I just let the silence stand. Because for the first time, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. I didn't feel the urge to apologize for setting a boundary. I hung up and cried, not because I regretted it, but because part of me still wanted her approval, still wanted to be loved for more than just my usefulness. But I also knew this: I couldn't be the emotional janitor of a family that refused to clean up after themselves. The next day, I blocked the family group chat. I sat in my kitchen, drinking lukewarm tea, and watched the morning sun hit the window just right. The steam from the mug curled like breath in winter air, and I thought, let them talk, let them twist the story, let them miss the version of me that always said yes. Because that version of me doesn't live here anymore. The phone call that ended everything came on a Tuesday night. I remember the way the light from the hallway spilled across my kitchen floor, catching on a plate I hadn't bothered to wash. The kind of stillness that usually comes after a long day, but this time, it was the calm before the collapse. My phone lit up with my mother's name. I hesitated, then answered. At first, her voice was composed, too composed, the kind of fake calm that only ever precedes a storm. She asked me if I was planning to come to Easter dinner. I told her I hadn't decided yet. She exhaled sharply. I just don't understand you anymore, she said. I replied quietly, you don't have to understand me, but I need you to respect my space. Then it began. She launched into a familiar, tired litany how I was ungrateful, how I thought I was better than everyone, how I'd abandoned my family after everything they'd done for me. And then, her voice rising, cracking under the weight of years of unsaid things, she said the words, I will never forget. As far as I'm concerned, you're not part of this family anymore. There was a sharp ringing in my ears. I stood still, the receiver pressed to my cheek, frozen. My other hand trembled slightly over the sink. The faucet dripped behind me soft, steady, like a clock ticking down something I hadn't seen coming. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there. And then I hung up. She called again. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to it later, her voice raw with tears and fury, calling me selfish, cold, cruel. But I never called her back, because something broke in me that night, not from her words, but from what I didn't feel. I didn't feel shocked. I didn't feel devastated. I felt free, like she'd finally said out loud what I had always sensed quietly for years, that I was only part of the family if I played the part they'd assigned me. The days that followed were quiet, painfully so. I went to work. I came home. I made dinner for one. I watered the plant by the window and watched the wind curl through the curtains. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. Not my friends. Not even my therapist, not right away. I wanted to hold the moment alone, let it settle before I let anyone else interpret it. And I learned something important in that silence. It's one thing to set boundaries, it's another to realize that those boundaries might cost you the only family you've ever known. And I had to grieve that. Not just the people, but the fantasy, the version of family I'd clung to for so long, hoping it would soften, hoping I could fix it, mold it, make it functional. That version had died, or maybe it had never truly existed. I had to sit with that truth, let it pierce me, and still choose peace. I remember walking through a nearby park that weekend, the first warm day after a long winter. People were out in light jackets, children on bikes, couples with dogs. I sat on a bench under a budding tree and felt the sun on my face. And in that moment, I thought, this is what it feels like to not be responsible for anyone's emotions but my own. It was terrifying and beautiful. Because even as I mourned the idea of being family, I was also discovering something I'd never really known. I belonged to myself now, and no one could take that from me. I wasn't prepared for how lonely healing would be. I had always pictured it like a soft sunrise, gentle, illuminating, hopeful. But in reality, healing felt more like sitting in the ruins of a life you built for other people, and realizing that none of it had ever truly been yours. The first holiday season came fast. Thanksgiving, then Christmas, then New Year's. 3 back-to-back reminders that I wasn't where I used to be and wasn't welcome there anymore. The group texts were quiet now. I had removed myself from the threads, blocked a few numbers that only reached out to guilt trip, not to understand. My inbox held no invitations, no, are you coming? No, we miss you. And yet, the ache lingered. I decorated my apartment in soft gold and white, bought myself a tiny artificial tree, lit candles that smelled like cinnamon and memory. I made my favorite dishes: stuffing, mashed potatoes, roasted carrot sand, plated everything for one. I even poured a glass of wine and played soft music like I had every year growing up, but the chair across from me stayed empty. And that night, when I curled up on the couch, I cried not because I regretted leaving, but because I was grieving the parts of me that still longed to be loved by people who couldn't love me the way I needed. Grief isn't just for loss of life. Sometimes it's for the loss of a role, a rhythm, a version of you that made sense even if it hurt. But there was beauty in that grief too, because it meant I was waking up to my own needs. I began to journal more during those months, not just the pain, but the quiet victories, the mornings I didn't wake up with anxiety twisting in my stomach, the moments I said no and didn't feel guilty, the days I smiled and meant it not for show, not for peacekeeping, but because joy had found me. One day in January, I walked past a mirror and stopped. There was something different about me. My shoulders were relaxed, my eyes steadier, my mouth not stretched into a performance of pleasantness, but resting in something closer to contentment. I didn't recognize myself fully, but for once, that didn't scare me. That month, my sister messaged me. Just a line. Still not talking to us? You're being ridiculous. There was no greeting, no warmth, no curiosity. Just entitlement, anger, expectation. The old me might have replied. Might have tried to explain, to soothe, to bridge the gap. But now I understood something crucial. I was never the one who broke the bridge. I just stopped rebuilding it after every fire they set. I didn't respond. Instead, I took my phone, placed it in a drawer, and went for a walk. It was cold that day. The kind of cold that makes your breath visible, makes your skin sting, but also makes you feel undeniably here. I wrapped my scarf tighter, felt my fingers in my gloves, and looked up at the winter sky-soft grey with slices of pale blue breaking through. And I whispered to myself, "You're doing okay," because no one else was going to say it. And that was all right. In the quiet, I started making new traditions. I hosted a solo Sunday every month, just me, my favorite meal, a new book or film, and no pressure to be anything but fully present with myself. I reconnected with old friends who didn't need me to perform. I signed up for a pottery class where no one knew my family, my history, or my title as the responsible one. They only knew me, or rather, the version of me I was becoming. And slowly, piece by piece, that began to feel like enough. It's funny how the word boundary can trigger people more than actual betrayal. Once I started saying no, really saying no, not the soft, maybe next time, or the deflecting, I'll see what I can do, the backlash came in waves. It started subtle. A cousin reached out to say they missed me, but ended the message with, "We just don't understand why you've shut everyone out." A family friend commented on one of my photos with, "Don't forget where you come from." Even an old neighbor messaged, "Your mum's been so upset lately. Maybe you should call her. Life is short." Each message chipped at the edge of my resolve, no because I wanted to go back, but because I was starting to realize just how deep the narrative ran. People didn't just see me as the peacemaker, they depended on it. They expected it. And now that I wasn't playing the part, they were mourning the convenience of me, not the connection. One Sunday morning, I got an email from my uncle. Long, dramatic, and littered with phrases like, "Family is forever, blood is thicker," and "We all make mistakes." But the part that hit hardest was this: "You've become so cold. This isn't the niece I remember. We miss the old you." And I realized something I hadn't dared say aloud yet. They didn't miss me. They missed the version of me who didn't take up space, who kept the peace, who never said no, who cleaned up the mess and swallowed the anger and wore the mask. But that version of me was gone. Not out of spite, not out of rebellion. Out of necessity, I needed to survive. Still, even with this clarity, the loneliness came back in waves. Some nights, I'd lie awake wondering if I was wrong, if I'd overreacted, if I should have just stayed quiet a little longer. Was I too sensitive? Was I selfish for walking away? Was I really the problem? But each time I started to spiral, I'd remind myself, I wasn't asking for too much. I was asking for basic respect, for reciprocity, for emotional honesty. Things that had never existed in our home, not really. And when I tried to introduce them, I was met with confusion, anger, silence. There was one particularly sharp moment that cemented it. I was sitting in my therapist's office, hands wrapped around a cup of tea she always kept on hand for me. I told her I felt like I'd set myself on fire to keep everyone else warm, and now that I'd stopped, they were angry at the cold. She nodded slowly, then asked, "When was the last time someone in your family asked how you were doing?" I couldn't answer. because it hadn't happened, not in a genuine, sustained way. Sure, I'd get the occasional, "You okay?" after I'd handled a crisis or mediated a fight, but it always came with the expectation that I'd bounce back, keep going, stay available. I'd never been seen for me only for the role I played. And that kind of invisibility? It's brutal. It makes you question whether you're lovable without the labor. So I started building a life where I didn't have to earn belonging. I cultivated a chosen family, people who didn't flinch when I cried, who didn't need me to fix everything, who just let me be. I started speaking up more at work. I told a close friend that I couldn't always be her emotional dumping ground. I practiced saying, "I can't help with that right now," even when it made my stomach twist. And every time I did, something inside me exhaled. Because I was teaching myself, moment by moment, that I was not responsible for other people's peace at the expense of my own. One day, while walking home with groceries, I passed by a mum and her teenage daughter arguing about something, probably curfew or screen time. And as I crossed the street, I heard the daughter shout, "You never listen to me!" Her voice cracked with that particular heartbreak only a teenager can channel. But it wasn't the words that stopped me. It was the way the mother responded. She turned, looked her daughter in the eyes, and said softly, "You're right. I didn't. I'm sorry." That moment hit me harder than I could have predicted, because I'd waited my entire life to hear someone say that to me. And no one ever had. But strangely, it didn't make me bitter. It made me hopeful. Because if someone could say it, even just a stranger on a sidewalk, then maybe I could say it to myself. Maybe I could be the one who finally listened. The letters came later. Not from my family, they were done writing to me. These were letters I wrote myself. Pages I filled late at night, sitting at my dining table, with only the glow of a lamp, and the whisper of my own thoughts to keep me company. I never meant to send them. They weren't apologies. They weren't pleas for reconciliation. They were more like exorcisms, writing out every word I had swallowed for decades. Everything I hadn't said at the dinner tables, during the shouting matches, in the tense silences after family events where I sat quietly and absorbed the hurt so no one else had to. The first letter was to my mother. I wrote, "You taught me how to hide my feelings behind a smile. You made me believe that silence was noble, that suffering without complaint was love. But that wasn't love, that was control." Then one to my sister. "I loved you even when you made fun of me in front of your friends, even when you borrowed from me and never paid it back, even when you laughed at my anxiety. But I see now that your love only existed when I was convenient." Another to my father. "I don't know what scared you into silence, but your silence raised me. And while I craved your protection, what I really needed was your voice." These letters flowed out of me like blood from a reopened wound. Some of them were messy, others surgical, but they all carried the same root emotion: grief. Grief for the childhood I lost in service of everyone else's comfort. Grief for the person I might have become if I hadn't spent years dimming myself to avoid triggering someone else. Grief for the love I tried to earn by sacrificing every piece of myself. I burned the first draft of each letter. There was no rage in the fire-only release, and after that, I started writing letters to myself. They were different, softer, gentler, like someone wrapping a warm blanket around my shoulders in a storm I didn't know I'd survived. One of them read, "I see you now, not for what you do, but for who you are. You are not a fixer. You are not responsible for other people's peace. You are allowed to rest." Another said, "You are not dramatic. You are not too sensitive. You are not a burden. You are allowed to exist as you are." These were the letters I'd needed my whole life. And so, I wrote Theme Mover, and over until the words stopped feeling foreign in my mouth. That spring, I took a solo trip to the mountains. I rented a tiny cabin nestled between tall pines, with no Wi-Fi, no signal, no pressure to be reachable. I packed books and snacks and notebooks and silence. The silence, especially, was something I had feared, but in that quiet, I found answers I hadn't realized I was still seeking. I sat on the porch one morning, coffee in hand, watching mists snake through the trees. I thought about who I used to be, the peacemaker who anticipated everyone's needs, who turned herself into a bridge so others wouldn't have to cross discomfort. And I whispered, "She's gone, and I miss her, but I don't want her back." That confession cracked something open in me. Because I had loved being needed. I had loved being praised for my calmness, my strength, my reliability. But now, I could see the cost. I'd built an identity around being indispensable and no one had stopped to ask if I was okay. Not even me. I stayed in that cabin for 3 days. I read, I cried, I slept like I hadn't in years. I let myself remember moments I had buried, birthday parties where I was forgotten, school awards no one attended, times I said, I'm fine when I was falling apart inside. But I also remembered my strength, my kindness, my desire to make things better not out of obligation, but out of love. And I realized something I hadn't dared say aloud before. I could still be kind, still be generous, still be loving without losing myself. Because now I had boundaries. Now I knew my worth wasn't in how well I managed others' emotions. It was in how fully I showed up for myself. When I drove home from that trip, I didn't feel fixed, but I felt grounded, more in my body than I had in years. I played music loud in the car, windows down, wind in my hair, and I sang not well, but with my whole chest. And for once, I wasn't performing. I was just free. Therapy helped, but not in the way I expected. I used to think therapy was about solving problems, clearing out the emotional debris so you could return to normal. But the truth is, there is no return. There is only rebuilding. And rebuilding means you have to get honest about what was never solid to begin with. In one of my early sessions, I told my therapist, I just don't want to be the bad guy. She tilted her head gently, then asked, Who told you you were? That question hit harder than I expected. Because no one ever said it directly, but it was always there. In the pauses after I said no, in the looks, the silences, the careful words that felt like accusations disguised as concern. I spent so long trying not to be too much, too emotional, too distant, too opinionated, too selfish. I trimmed myself into something acceptable, manageable, palatable, and then I left that version of me behind and suddenly, I was too cold, too harsh, too unforgiving. There was no winning, only disappearing. So therapy became a space where I was allowed to not perform. I showed up messy, defensive, tired, angry, and instead of being punished or guilted, I was met with curiosity. I was asked to sit with my discomfort, to examine the part of me that still wanted to run back, fix it all, be loved again. But more importantly, I was asked to make peace with the idea that love doesn't always look like what we were taught. Sometimes it looks like absence. Sometimes it looks like choosing yourself even when no one claps. One breakthrough came on a rainy afternoon. I'd been telling a story about something small, how I used to hide my bad grades so my parents wouldn't get upset. I laughed as I said it, brushing it off, but my therapist didn't laugh. She said, "You were a child managing adult emotions. That's not funny, that's heartbreaking." I sat still for a long time after that, and something softened. Because for the first time, someone named the thing I had buried so deep, it stopped feeling real. That what happened to me wasn't just sad, it was wrong. It gave me permission to rewrite the stories I told about myself, not as the problem solver, not as the emotional sponge, but as a person who had been hurt, a person who survived, a person who deserved ease. That shift changed everything. I stopped excusing their behavior as just how they are. I stopped minimizing the impact. I stopped hoping they'd come around, apologize, finally see me. Instead, I started seeing myself. I got better at catching old habits like explaining myself too much or softening my tone to make others comfortable. I practiced staying silent when someone was uncomfortable with my truth, not out of cruelty, but out of self-respect. I also started saying things I'd never said before. No, I'm not available this weekend. I'm not comfortable with that conversation. I need time to think before I respond. Each sentence felt like reclaiming territory I hadn't realized I'd ceded. And then, slowly, something beautiful began to happen. I started to like myself. Not the version of me that kept everyone happy, the real me. The quiet thinker, the one who cried during commercials, the one who loved bookstores and thunderstorms and solo Sunday brunches. The one who didn't want to talk about the family drama anymore, who wanted to talk about ideas, feelings, plans for the future. I found new friends, people who weren't drawn to me because I fixed their lives, but because we laughed together, shared honestly, held space for one another. People who didn't need me to be on all the time. People who could sit in silence with me and still feel connected. And I started building a life not around absence, but around intention. I got a dog. I redecorated my space with colors I loved. I threw away the guilt-soaked dishes passed down from my grandmother and bought bright, mismatched plates that made me smile every morning. I even started a small garden on my balcony, herbs and tomatoes and flowers that bloomed under my care. For the first time, nurturing didn't feel like sacrifice. It felt like homecoming, because I was finally giving the care I used to give to everyone else myself. I didn't expect to see my sister again. It had been over 3 years since we'd spoken, 3 years of silence, filled with occasional jabs through extended family, passive-aggressive social media posts, and birthday messages that felt more like formalities than attempts at connection. But life, in its strange symmetry, tends to bring us back to the places we've left unresolved. It happened at a mutual friend's memorial service. He had passed suddenly an aneurysm, they said. One of those moments that jerks you out of the smallness of your own orbit and reminds you how fragile everything really is. The chapel was small, filled with quiet sobs and familiar faces. I had almost turned around in the parking lot when I saw her car, but something told me to stay, not for her, not for closure, just for me. I found a seat near the back. Safe, unassuming, I kept my eyes forward, hands folded in my lap, and then I felt her sit down beside me. She didn't say anything at first, neither did I. For a few minutes, we just existed next to each other, breathing the same air, listening to the same hymns, mourning the same man, but also mourning different lives. Mine, the version of us that never got a chance to grow. After the service, we stepped outside together. The sky was overcast, just on the edge of rain. People lingered in clusters, hugging, recalling memories, promising to stay in touch. She turned to me, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hi." I nodded. "Hi." There was an awkward silence. Then she said, "You look good." I smiled politely. "Thanks." Another pause. She looked down at her shoes, then back at me. "I don't really know what happened," she said. "One minute you were just gone." I took a breath. "I didn't vanish," I said softly. "I just stopped showing up for roles I never auditioned for." She flinched, not visibly, but in that quiet way people do when words hit closer than they want to admit. "I didn't know you felt that way," she replied. "I don't think anyone did," I said. "That was the problem." She nodded slowly, chewing on her lower lip. "I miss you." I looked at her, really looked at her. Her hair was longer, her eyes softer. She didn't look like the person who used to weaponize my silence or laugh off my pain. But people can wear new masks just as easily as they wear old ones. "I miss the idea of us," I said honestly. "But I don't know if we ever existed in a way that was healthy for me." Her eyes watered. "I'm sorry." It wasn't a grand apology. It wasn't followed by excuses or justifications. Just 2 words. Sincere, small, delicate. And for the first time, I believed her. We didn't hug. We didn't make plans. We just stood there, 2 people with shared history, shared blood, but separate futures. And that was enough. Driving home that evening, I didn't cry. I didn't overthink it. I didn't replay every word, or pick apart the tone of her voice. I let it be what it was, a moment. A tiny thread of peace in a tapestry frayed by years of pain. Sometimes, reconciliation isn't about rebuilding the relationship. Sometimes, it's about reclaiming the pieces of yourself that were lost in it. I still have my boundaries. I still protect my peace. I still say no, unapologetically, when something doesn't feel right. But now, when I think about my family, I don't feel rage. I don't even feel sadness most days. I feel distance and peace. And in that distance, I've built something solid, something mine. A life that doesn't revolve around proving my worth or soothing other people's storms. A life with laughter that doesn't feel forced. Friendships built on mutual care. Days filled with quiet joy. And nights where I sleep soundly, knowing I didn't abandon anyone. I simply came home to myself. And I'm not leaving again. Word count, 1,228. Emotional wind down, 300 words. So, if you're still here, listen, thank you. This story wasn't easy to tell. Not because of the pain, but because of the softness that came after. Because once you learn to stop betraying yourself for other people's comfort, it's hard to look back without a little ache. But here's the truth. Healing doesn't always look like confrontation or loud exits. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's walking away without slamming the door. Sometimes it's building a life so steady, so calm, that no one else gets to shake it. If you've ever been the one to hold the family together, if you've ever swallowed your truth just to keep the peace, if you've ever wondered whether your needs were too much, they're not. You are not too much. You are not selfish for wanting to rest. You are not wrong for choosing yourself. It's okay to miss the people you walked away from, and it's okay to not want them back in your life. Grief and peace can live in the same breath. I hope you find the courage to take up space, to speak gently to yourself, to write the letters you'll never send, and maybe burn them with love. And if your voice shakes when you finally say, "I can't do this anymore," let it. That trembling, it's the sound of your truth coming home.